A full year had slipped by, marked by 4 grueling seasons, each tinged with its own shade of sorrow. Winter brought a numbing coldness to the soul. Spring stirred a painful reawakening. Summer weighed heavy with an unbearable void, and autumn, with its fading leaves, seemed to resonate most deeply with Emma's weary heart. It had been 12 months since James was gone, and Emma had learned to carry on, or rather, to simply exist. She had returned to her job, rented a modest apartment on the quiet outskirts of town, a place where no one knew her past, where no framed memories stared back at her from the walls. She had become a shadow of her former self, striving to blend into the background, to dull her emotions, to avoid any flicker of hope. Every evening, she descended into the subway, a ritual that grounded her daily routine. It was her journey from the office back to her small, safe haven. Most days, she buried herself in a novel or gazed out the window at the flickering dim lights of the tunnel. Today felt no different. The exhaustion of the week had drained her completely, leaving her feeling as squeezed out as a used lemon. The train lurched forward, picking up speed, and Emma lifted her gaze. That's when she saw him. He stood by the opposite door, gripping the handrail, tall, dark-haired, with that same self-assured look that once made her heart race. The same subtle curve of his lips when lost in thought. It was James. Emma froze, as if struck by lightning. Her heart pounded wildly, heat rushing to her cheeks. It couldn't be real. A trick of the mind, a cruel illusion born of grief. Yet there he was, solid and alive. She blinked hard, desperate to dispel the mirage, but he didn't vanish. He stood there, a ghost from her past, made flesh in the present. Emma took a shaky breath, trying to steady her trembling hands. She studied his face, searching for any discrepancy, any detail to prove this was a mistake. But no, it was him. Her James, her husband, the man she believed was dead. The train pulled into a station, and he stepped off. Emma, as if under a spell, followed. Her mind was blank, her actions driven by pure instinct. He walked briskly, navigating the crowd with ease, while Emma trailed behind, keeping her distance to avoid losing sight of him. She felt like a stalker, a stranger in her own skin, but she couldn't stop. She needed answers. He turned down a narrow alley, then emerged onto a bustling street lined with shops and cozy diners, the kind of place where locals grab a quick burger or a slice of apple pie after work. Emma shadowed him, her chest tight, her heart fluttering like a trapped bird. At last, he stopped in front of a sleek, gated apartment complex, complete with a security guard at the entrance. He exchanged a few words with the guard, who gave a friendly nod and let him through. Emma halted near the gate, hesitating to get any closer. She watched as he strolled down a tree-lined path toward one of the buildings. He paused at a door, fishing out his keys, when it suddenly swung open. A young woman stood there, striking and radiant with long blonde hair. She greeted him with a warm smile, and he pulled her into an embrace. Then, from behind her, a small child darted out, rushing toward him. The man scooped the boy up, tossing him playfully into the air as the child's laughter echoed through the quiet courtyard. Emma staggered back, as if she'd been physically struck. She stared at the scene, a snapshot of someone else's perfect life, a happy family, a tender moment she could never reclaim. In that instant, it hit her. He was alive. He had faked his death. He had lied to her, betrayed everyone. Unable to bear another second, Emma turned on her heel and walked away, the sound of that child's laughter lingering in her ears like a bitter reminder of all she'd lost. As she trudged back toward the subway, her mind replayed mundane arguments from their past, those petty squabbles over whose turn it was to pick up groceries, or why he always forgot to text if he'd be late from work. Back then, she'd nag him with a half-serious tone. "Hey, buddy, you planning to leave me hanging again?" And he'd roll his eyes with a smirk. Now, Those memories felt like daggers, cutting deeper with the realization of his deception. Emma wandered aimlessly, her mind a chaotic mess, unsure of where she was headed or why she was even moving. All she knew was an overwhelming urge to escape that place, to put as much distance as possible between herself and the brutal truth that had crushed her spirit like a heavy boulder. One question throbbed relentlessly in her head. How could this be? After what felt like an eternity, she stumbled upon a nearby subway station and collapsed onto a bench, desperate to steady her racing heart. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, and tears blurred her vision as she fumbled for her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "Hey, Michael," she murmured weakly when he picked up. "I really need your help right now." Michael had been her rock, a friend since they were kids scraping their knees on the same playground. As a detective, he was handling the investigation into James's death, and Emma trusted him implicitly to help her navigate this nightmare. "What's going on, Emma?" Michael asked, concern evident in his tone as he picked up on the quiver in her voice. I saw James," she stammered. "He's alive, Michael." A heavy silence fell over the line. All Emma could hear was Michael's uneven breathing on the other end. "Are you absolutely sure?" he finally asked, his voice cautious. "I'm positive," Emma replied, her voice cracking. "I saw him with my own eyes. He's living across town, with a whole new family." "Good Lord," Michael muttered under his breath. "I'm coming over right now. We'll talk through everything, step by step." Emma waited for him on the cold subway bench, feeling utterly drained, as if every ounce of energy had been sucked out of her. She had no idea what to do next, or how to live with this devastating revelation. When Michael arrived, he pulled her into a tight hug, trying to offer some comfort. Inside, Emma felt a storm brewing, a desperate urge to scream, to cry, to smash something, anything. Yet, she sat there, frozen, staring blankly into space as if turned to stone. They headed back to her apartment together. Over a cup of strong black coffee, something Michael always insisted on when things got tough, Emma poured out everything she had seen and felt. Michael listened intently, not interrupting, understanding that she needed to let it all out. "I just don't get it," Emma said, her voice hollow as she finished her story. "Why would he do this? Why would he put me through this?" "We'll figure it out," Michael assured her firmly. "I promise we'll get to the bottom of this." He pulled out his phone and started making calls, likely to his contacts at the precinct. Emma watched him, her mind shrouded in a fog, realizing that nothing would ever be the same again. After hanging up, Michael turned to her with a determined look. "First thing tomorrow, I'm pulling the case files," he said. "We'll see what adds up and what doesn't. For now, you need to rest. Try to get some sleep, okay?" Emma shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "There's no way I can sleep," she admitted. "I can't wrap my head around the fact that this is actually happening." "I get it," Michael replied softly. "But you've got to try to keep it together. We've got a long road ahead of us." He stayed with her through the night, even though Emma couldn't close her eyes for a second. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment with James in her mind, wondering how she could have been so blind to any signs of deception. How had she missed it all? The next morning, over a quick breakfast of toast and jam, a typical rushed meal before a big day, they headed to the city archives where the records of James's supposed death were stored. Emma felt a chill run down her spine as Michael sifted through faded documents, old photographs of the crash scene, and interview transcripts. It was as if she were reliving that horrific chapter of her life all over again. "Take a look at this," Michael said, pointing to a specific report on the identification process. "The ID was done indirectly," he explained. "The body was in bad shape, and from what I can see, you weren't even there for the procedure." Emma nodded, fighting back a fresh wave of tears. "They wouldn't let me see him," she whispered. "They said it would be too much for me to handle. I signed some forms, but I can't even remember what they were." "That's a red flag right there," Michael muttered, his brow furrowing as he scrutinized the paperwork. As they sat in the dimly lit archive room, surrounded by the musty smell of old paper, Emma couldn't help but overhear a nearby clerk grumbling about someone taking the last donut from the break room, a petty squabble so typical of office life here. It grounded her for a moment, a reminder of mundane normalcy amidst her personal chaos. Michael, sensing her distraction, gave her a small, reassuring nod, as if to say they'd tackle this together, no matter how messy it got. As a rule, situations like this demand the personal presence of family members, along with their signatures for verification. Mr. Daniel picked up a magnifying glass and scrutinized the signature that was supposed to belong to Emma with a keen eye. After a moment, he raised an eyebrow and said, "It doesn't look like this was signed by you." A shiver ran down Emma's spine as a wave of unease washed over her. "I don't get it," she murmured, her voice tinged with confusion. Michael, meanwhile, kept poring over the case files with meticulous attention. He couldn't help but notice several oddities in how the documents were prepared. The death certificate, the insurance policy, and the paperwork for claiming compensation. All of them had been processed with unusual speed, almost too smoothly, and in most instances, Emma's personal signature was conspicuously missing. "There are too many inconsistencies here, Emma," Michael said, setting the stack of papers aside with a sigh. "Way too many. It feels like someone was in a real hurry to wrap this up and sweep it under the rug." Emma's mind drifted back to the minor discrepancies she had noticed in the insurance forms earlier. Vague wording, peculiar clauses that hadn't been properly explained to her. At the time, she had been too overwhelmed by grief to dig deeper into the fine print, barely functioning as she navigated her loss. "I was a mess back then," she admitted quietly. "I just signed whatever they put in front of me. I thought they were trying to help me out." Michael's tone was clipped as he replied, "That's exactly what they were banking on. They preyed on your pain and vulnerability. But don't worry, we're going to set this right." Determined to get to the bottom of it, Michael pressed on with the investigation. He requested footage from the subway surveillance cameras to verify whether the man Emma claimed to have seen was indeed James. He also sent an inquiry to the insurance company for copies of the documents tied to the compensation payout. Returning to the precinct later that day, Michael felt like he was holding a ticking time bomb. Confirming his suspicions didn't bring any relief. If anything, the weight of responsibility bore down on him even harder. He headed straight to the small, cluttered office where he usually reviewed CCTV footage, muttering under his breath, "All right, let's see how our dearly departed pulled off this little resurrection." Thankfully, the subway camera recordings were still intact. Michael entered the time and station Emma had mentioned, and soon the screen flickered with the faces of commuters rushing through their daily grind. Some grabbing a quick coffee from a nearby stand, others juggling briefcases and phones. Then, there he was, a familiar silhouette that hit like a punch to the gut. It was James, not a ghost or a figment of Emma's grief-stricken mind, but James in the flesh, very much alive. Michael replayed the footage several times, zooming in on the grainy image. There was no mistaking it. His face looked a little gaunt, and there was a weary shadow in his eyes. But it was unmistakably James, alive and well. "That sneaky bastard," Michael growled, leaning back in his creaky chair with a scowl. Not only did he screw over Emma, but he's got the nerve to rip off the system too. He printed out a handful of stills from the footage, capturing James's face clearly, and marched off to his supervisor's office. After laying out the situation and presenting the images, the boss furrowed his brow, his expression grim. "What's your take on this, Michael?" he asked, tapping a pen against his desk. "I'm thinking this is fraud on a massive scale," Michael replied without hesitation. "Faking a death Cashing in on insurance payouts? We've got to dig deeper. The supervisor gave a slow nod, his face unreadable. Go for it. Bring in whoever you need, but watch your step. Cases like this rarely come without a nasty surprise or two. With the green light from his boss, Michael dove headfirst into the work. His first move was to follow up with the insurance company that had paid out the hefty sum to Emma. The response came quicker than expected. Yes, the claim had been approved, and Emma had indeed received a substantial payout, far more than anyone might expect for a policy processed in such a suspiciously short time frame. As Michael sat at his desk later that evening, a half-eaten sandwich from the local deli sitting forgotten beside him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the tip of the iceberg. He overheard a couple of colleagues bickering in the break room over whose turn it was to restock the coffee machine. A typical petty squabble that barely registered as he mulled over the case. "Hey, Mike, you gonna finish that sandwich or just stare at it all night?" One of them called out with a smirk, but Michael just waved them off, too focused to engage in the usual office banter. Michael had requested a copy of the paperwork tied to the recent payout, determined to get to the bottom of things. As he pored over the documents at his cluttered desk, something immediately caught his eye. The signature attributed to Emma on the application form seemed off. Too bold, too flamboyant, not at all like the careful, measured strokes he remembered from her past correspondence. Digging deeper, Michael pulled out a few older samples of Emma's handwriting he had on file for comparison. The conclusion was undeniable. This signature was a forgery, plain as day. Under his breath, as he scribbled notes for the official report, Michael muttered to himself, "Well, here's another charge to add to the list: document fraud." At the same time, he tasked his team with identifying a man captured on subway surveillance footage. It wasn't a tough nut to crack. Using facial recognition software, they quickly pinned down a match. A guy resembling James, living at a specific address under the name Mr. Daniel. Without wasting a moment, Michael headed out to the location. It was just another unremarkable apartment complex, the kind you'd see on every other block in the city, with kids playing in the courtyard and the faint smell of grilled burgers wafting from a nearby backyard. He took the elevator to the right floor, rang the doorbell, and waited. A young woman answered, balancing a toddler on her hip, her face a mix of curiosity and caution. "Hey there, ma'am," Michael said, flashing his badge. "I'm with the police. I need to speak with Mr. Daniel." Her brow furrowed, and she shifted the child to her other side. "He's at work right now. Is everything okay?" she asked, her tone laced with worry. "I just need to have a word with him. It's urgent," Michael replied, keeping his voice steady but firm. She hesitated, biting her lip. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Michael shook his head. "No, I've got to speak with him directly. When will he be back?" "Around 7 tonight," she said after a pause. "All right, I'll swing by then," Michael concluded, handing her his card with a quick nod before heading out. Back at the precinct, nursing a lukewarm cup of diner coffee, he dove into researching Mr. Daniel's background. New ID, new job, a completely fresh start. According to the records, Mr. Daniel was a widower, having lost his wife in a tragic accident. He worked as a manager at a small company dealing in construction supplies. Nothing flashy, nothing suspicious on the surface. Yet, something gnawed at Michael. It all seemed too neat, too polished, like a story straight out of a feel-good movie. On a hunch, he decided to dig into any property tied to Mr. Daniel's name. That's when he struck gold. A modest suburban apartment had been purchased under Mr. Daniel's name, just weeks before James seemingly vanished from the radar. "So, you've got yourself a little backup plan, huh?" Michael whispered to himself, a smirk tugging at his lips as he jotted down the address. By evening, he was back at the apartment complex where James, now Mr. Daniel, resided. He parked a block away, keeping a low profile, and settled in to wait. Right around 7, a car pulled up, and out stepped a man, James, no question about it. Michael's instincts kicked in. He got out of his vehicle and followed at a distance, catching up just as the man reached the building's entrance. "James!" Michael called out sharply. The man spun around, a flicker of panic crossing his face. "You've got the wrong guy. My name's Daniel," he said, his voice tight. "Don't play dumb with me," Michael shot back, stepping closer. "I know exactly who you are. You're under arrest for fraud and forging documents." James made a desperate move to break free, but Michael was quicker, pinning his arms and snapping on the handcuffs. "You can't do this! I haven't done anything wrong!" James shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet street as a neighbor peeked out from behind a curtain. "We'll sort that out down at the station, buddy," Michael replied coolly, guiding him toward the squad car. Back in the apartment, Sophia, the woman who shared her life with the man she knew as Daniel, stood by the window, cradling their little girl in her arms. She watched helplessly as the police car drove off into the night, her mind racing with questions. What on earth was happening? Had she missed some glaring red flag over Sunday dinners of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, or during their quiet evenings arguing over which streaming show to binge next? She felt lost, staring into the darkness, unsure of what tomorrow would bring. Who was this person who had mistaken Mr. Daniel for someone named James? Why had he been taken into custody? Sophia's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She had no idea what steps to take, where to turn, or who to ask for help in this nightmare. It felt as though the ground beneath her feet was crumbling, transforming her once happy life into a living hell. Sophia had been summoned to the police station as a witness for questioning. Accompanied by a state-appointed lawyer, she arrived looking utterly lost and visibly shaken, her eyes wide with anxiety. Michael, the officer in charge, made an effort to speak gently, fully aware that she was likely an innocent pawn caught in a web of deceit. "Hey, Sophia, I know this must be a real shock for you," he started with a calm tone. "But we really need your help to piece together what's going on here." Sophia remained silent, her head bowed, her hands trembling in her lap, as if they couldn't find a place to rest. "Please, tell me everything you know about Mr. Daniel," Michael pressed on patiently. "How did you two meet? What did he do for a living? What did he share about his personal life?" After a long pause, Sophia began to speak, her voice halting and unsteady. She explained that she had met Mr. Daniel, known to everyone as James, at the small diner where she worked as a waitress, a cozy spot known for its homemade apple pie and strong coffee. He struck her as a quiet, thoughtful man who had endured a heartbreaking loss, the death of his wife. He became a regular, often stopping by after work, and over time, their casual chats turned into something warmer, a quiet connection. He mentioned he worked in web design, even showing her pictures of sleek websites he'd created on his phone. He was kind, attentive, always making sure she was okay, and a loving father to their little one. Did he ever talk about his past? Maybe his family? Michael interjected, leaning forward slightly. No. Sophia shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. He was pretty private about that stuff. He'd say the past is behind us, no point dwelling on it. I didn't push him. I figured he was still healing from his loss. Michael listened intently, jotting down notes in his worn-out notebook, nodding occasionally to show he was following. He could tell Sophia was being honest. She genuinely seemed unaware of James's true identity. The man had carefully buried his real history, crafting a new life built on lies. Meanwhile, Emma was called into the station to provide an official statement. She sat in Michael's cluttered office, staring out the window at the dreary urban sprawl, the gray sky mirroring her mood. Inside, she wrestled with a strange cocktail of emotions: shock, relief, anger, and an odd sense of peace. "Emma, how are you holding up?" Michael asked, noticing her distant expression as he set down a styrofoam cup of vending machine coffee on the desk. "It's weird," she replied softly, almost to herself. "It's like I've just woken up from a bad dream. None of this feels real." "I get it," Michael nodded, his voice steady. But this is the end of it. He's going to answer for everything he's done. Emma let out a heavy sigh, her fingers tracing the edge of the desk absent-mindedly. I don't even know what I'm feeling, Michael. Anger, hurt, maybe a bit of everything, but mostly relief. I've carried this weight, this uncertainty, for so long. Now at least, I have answers. Michael updated her on the investigation, detailing James's arrest and Sophia's questioning. He slid a few photos across the desk, showing James under a different name, with a new family, a new life. Emma gazed at them with a detached curiosity, as if she were looking at a stranger's story. He's been charged with fraud, forging documents, and falsifying signatures, Michael explained matter-of-factly. He's looking at some serious time behind bars. Emma gave a small nod, her expression unreadable. I just don't understand what was going through his head, she murmured. How could he do something like this? Why? Money, Emma, Michael answered plainly, leaning back in his chair. It's always about money. He was drowning in debt. His business was tanking. This was his way out, or so he thought. Back at the holding cell, James sat slumped against the cold concrete wall, staring blankly ahead. Defeat and confusion weighed heavily on him. He knew, deep down, that his carefully constructed life had come crashing down, and there was no rebuilding it now. Everything he had so meticulously built over the years crumbled to dust in an instant. He harbored no regrets for what he had done, firmly believing there had been no other choice. Cornered and desperate, faking his own death seemed like the only escape route at the time, a clever ruse to slip away from the chaos. Yet now, with the weight of hindsight, he realized he had made a catastrophic mistake. Not only had he shattered Emma's life into pieces, but he had also betrayed Sophia and their young child in the worst possible way. He was fully aware that a prison sentence loomed on the horizon, an inevitable consequence of his actions. He knew Sophia would never forgive him, and he couldn't blame her. He had lost everything that mattered. A harsh creak echoed through the cell as the heavy door swung open, and a guard stepped inside. Hey, buddy, your lawyer's here to see you, the guard announced in a gruff tone before stepping aside. In the small, sterile consultation room, a sharply dressed young man awaited him, adjusting his tie as he gestured for James to take a seat. I've gone through your case file, he started with a measured tone. The charges against you are serious, no doubt, but I believe we can work on mitigating the sentence if we play our cards right. James sat there, unresponsive, his gaze distant. What did it matter? No legal maneuver or courtroom strategy could ever restore what he had thrown away. Interrupting the lawyer mid-sentence, he muttered, What's going to happen to Sophia and our kid? The lawyer paused, his expression softening slightly. Sophia's struggling right now, he admitted. She's getting some counseling to help her cope with everything. James buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by a wave of self-loathing. He felt utterly worthless, a man who had inflicted unimaginable pain on those he once claimed to love. I've got this coming, he whispered, barely audible. I deserve every bit of this punishment. Meanwhile, Emma returned to her quiet apartment, feeling hollow yet strangely liberated at the same time. She knew the road to healing would be long and grueling, but she was determined to face it head-on. Just as she settled in with a cup of comforting chamomile tea, a small ritual to calm her nerves, the doorbell rang, startling her. Hesitating for a moment, she walked over and opened the door to find Sophia standing there, pale and weary, her eyes red and swollen from crying, cradling her sleeping toddler in her arms. I just needed to talk to someone, Sophia stammered, her voice trembling with emotion. Emma stepped back, silently inviting her inside. They moved to the cozy living room, settling onto the worn-out couch, the faint aroma of last night's grilled cheese sandwiches still lingering in the air. The child rested peacefully in Sophia's lap, as they sat in uneasy silence for a moment. "I know you're going through hell right now," Emma began gently. "But I need you to understand something. I don't hold you responsible. You're as much a victim of his lies as I am." Tears streamed down Sophia's face as she struggled to hold herself together. "I don't even know where to start," she sobbed quietly. "I trusted him with everything. I loved him. And he destroyed it all." Emma nodded, her own heart aching with shared pain. "I get it," she said softly. "I loved him too, and I was just as blindsided by his betrayal." They sat in silence for a long while, each lost in their own tangled thoughts. Eventually, Sophia lifted her tear-streaked face and met Emma's gaze. "What's going to happen to him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He'll face the consequences of what he's done," Emma replied firmly. "The law doesn't bend for anyone." Sophia's expression grew even more anxious as she clutched her child a little tighter. "And what about me and my little one? How are we supposed to move forward after this?" Emma let out a heavy sigh, unsure of the answer herself, but resolute in her compassion. "We'll figure something out," she assured her. "We've got to stick together and help each other through this mess." A faint, grateful smile flickered across Sophia's face. "Thanks," she murmured. "Thanks for not turning me away." Emma reached out, wrapping her in a comforting embrace. In that moment, they weren't rivals or strangers. They were just two women bound by a shared tragedy. Two souls who needed to muster the strength to keep going, no matter the odds. A few weeks after James's arrest, Emma received the insurance payout, officially recognized as a victim of his deception. Sitting at her small kitchen table, a half-eaten slice of apple pie on a plate beside her, comfort food for tough days, she stared at the numbers on her laptop screen. The money had hit her account, a cold, hard sum that represented years of lies, broken dreams, and stolen trust. Yet, as she looked at the figure, there was no sense of victory, no relief, only a bitter reminder of all that had been lost. The amount seemed staggering, almost surreal. But how could one possibly put a price on the anguish endured over the years? How do you quantify the endless nights spent grieving for someone who was still alive, yet so far out of reach? Michael reached out to her later that same day, his voice crackling through the phone with a mix of concern and urgency. "Hey, Emma, did the payment come through?" "Yeah, it did," she replied curtly, her tone clipped as if she wanted to end the conversation before it even started. "So, are you planning to take James to court for additional compensation for all the emotional damage he caused?" Michael pressed, not letting the silence linger. Emma paused, her mind racing. She could almost see James standing before her in the courtroom, his defeated posture, the feeble excuses tumbling from his lips as he tried to justify the unjustifiable. But then, with a firm resolve, she answered, "No, Michael, I'm not going to do it. You sure about that?" "He's got it coming, every bit of it," Michael insisted, his voice tinged with frustration. "I know he does, but I'm done wasting any more of my life on him. Let the court decide his fate. As far as I'm concerned, this chapter is closed," she said, her words carrying a finality that left no room for debate. Michael let out a heavy sigh, the kind you'd hear over a late-night diner chat while splitting a plate of greasy fries. "All right, if that's how you feel. I just wanted to make sure you're getting everything you're owed." "Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate all you've done for me." Emma softened, her gratitude genuine despite the weight of the topic. Meanwhile, James sat alone in his holding cell, staring blankly at the dull, gray wall in front of him. His world had crumbled in an instant, leaving nothing behind but rubble. He'd lost everything: his family, his freedom, the trust of those he once held dear. Sophia hadn't visited him, not even once. Deep down, he knew she'd never forgive him. He had betrayed her, lied to her, stripped away any chance of a future together. In his mind, he kept seeing her face, etched with pain and disillusionment, and each memory squeezed his heart tighter with guilt. Her words from their last confrontation in the investigator's office echoed relentlessly in his head. "I just don't get it, James. How could you do this? How could you live with me, day after day, knowing it was all a lie? How could you look me in the eye and say you loved me?" Her voice had cut through him like a knife, sharp and unrelenting. He had no answer then, just hung his head in silence, and he still had none now. One quiet evening, Emma sat at a cozy coffee shop with a friend, sipping on a pumpkin spice latte, a seasonal staple, and chatting about a recent modern art exhibit downtown. Her phone buzzed on the table, interrupting their discussion about abstract sculptures. It was Michael again. "Hey, Emma, I know you didn't want to get dragged into the courtroom drama, but I've got some news for you." "What's going on?" she asked, a hint of apprehension creeping into her voice. "They've sentenced James to 6 years in prison," he informed her, his tone matter of fact. Emma fell silent, unsure of how to process the news. Part of her felt a quiet satisfaction that justice had been served, like the relief of finishing a long, grueling marathon. Yet another part of her couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for James. She didn't want him to suffer endlessly. She just wanted him gone from her life for good. "Thanks for letting me know, Michael," she finally said, her voice steady but distant. "I guess that's it then." "Yeah, Emma, that's it. You're free now," he replied, a note of reassurance in his words. After hanging up, Emma felt an immense weight lift off her shoulders, as if she'd just shed a heavy winter coat on the first warm day of spring. She was truly free, free from the past, from the resentment, from the pain that had tethered her for so long. She had forgiven James, not for his sake, but for her own peace of mind. She came to realize that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what he'd done. It was about releasing herself from the grip he'd held over her life. In an extraordinary display of strength and compassion, Emma even found it within herself to reach out to Sophia, the other person James had wronged so deeply, offering her support over a shared brunch of avocado toast and mimosas at a local spot. She understood that hurt only breeds more hurt, and that only through forgiveness and kindness could this vicious cycle be broken.